on the dogmas of religion as distinguished from moral principles. All mankind, from the beginning of the world to the present day, have been fighting, quarreling, burning, and torturing one another for abstractions unintelligible to themselves and to all others, and absolutely beyond the comprehension of the human mind. Thomas Jefferson wrote those words in a letter in 1816. And today, if I do my work well, by this afternoon, should you leave here and happen to run into Mr. Jefferson, you can tell him that religion is no longer absolutely beyond the comprehension of the human mind. What I hope to show you this afternoon is it is very much within the comprehension of the human mind. That we know now why human minds generate religious beliefs, why they generate the specific ones they do, why we're all vulnerable to them and to supernatural beliefs. And what Jefferson did not know, that when he wrote those words in 1816, there was a 7-year-old boy in England who would revolutionize our understanding of all life on Earth and would trigger a revolution in the cognitive neurosciences, one of the outgrowths of which is the understanding of religious beliefs. And what I'm going to do this morning is several things to give you the modern Darwinian synthesis, because that describes the architecture of the brain. A little bit on human evolution, and then to outline some of the cognitive mechanisms, some of the main ones that generate religious beliefs. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the neurobiology of ritual. Now, before I do that, there are a number of people I want to thank. First and foremost, Sean, for the kind introduction, for having me here, for Austin Harper, Sarah Statz, Betty Dietzler, the volunteers that have taken such good care of me. Thank you all for coming to 9 o'clock services on a Sunday. Also, I want to thank two people that are really in some sense responsible for why I'm here. Richard Dawkins and Robin Elizabeth Cornwell, the executive director of the Dawkins Foundation. One of the great privileges of my life has been working with the foundation. I would encourage you to go to the website. We've got a great web team together that is redoing the website. We want to be an umbrella for other organizations. Post your meetings on our site. There's going to be a map that you can go to anywhere in the country, and it'll tell you organizations and events that are happening literally around the world. And really, if it wasn't for the opportunity to work with the Dawkins Foundation, I wouldn't be here. So, let's begin. What people may not realize is that even in the origin of the species, Darwin had a sense that his ideas would even revolutionize psychology. And Darwin's idea, as you know, is remarkably simple. And within a species, there's variation. Those traits that are heritable, that augment survival and reproductive success, are the traits, the adaptations that become instantiated in the organism. And if you take Darwin's idea and you combine it with genetics, and this is Watson and Crick in 1953 at the time that they mapped out the double helix. Anybody know what you get when you combine Darwin and Watson and Crick? Nobel Peace Prize. This is what you get. The modern Darwinian synthesis, probably the most articulate expression of it still remains Richard Dawkins' The Selfish Gene in 1976. And this is one of the nicest statements of it I've ever seen, that all life, plant and animal, integrated collections of problem-solving devices, adaptations, designed by natural selection over evolutionary time to promote in some specific way the survival of the genes that built those adaptations. How does that translate? So my heart solves the problem of pumping blood. My lungs solve the problem of extracting oxygen from the air. Hemoglobin solves the problem of transporting the oxygen. At every single level of biological inquiry, natural selection, from membranes to minds. Now, the other reason that this statement is important, and I would argue, needs to be, to be an educated person coming out of high school, you need to know this. This is also a statement about the human mind. The mind is what the brain does, and the brain is this integrated collection of problem-solving devices designed by natural selection over evolutionary time. A way of thinking about it is that the mind is like the Apollo spacecraft. What's the Apollo spacecraft? It's this compact array of engineering devices that are solving a constant stream of problems. Only a few of the solutions become conscious to the astronauts. And that's the way your mind-brain works. You're solving a constant stream of problems, a few of which become conscious. For instance, I'm an upside-down two-dimensional image on your retina, and complex adaptations turn that into the three-dimensional view you have at the moment. But what I'm going to show you, I hope, is that you also have complex social adaptations that are crucial to religious belief. You don't know it, but you are actually watching my eyes, making judgments about my intentions, my wishes, my desires. You are making judgments about my personality based on the tone of my voice, my facial structure, very specific adaptations that are solving those problems, and you may be conscious of a few of them. And it's those adaptations in particular that go into religious belief. So, let's just take a little detour here for a moment. And again, a part of Darwin's genius was that in the origin of the species, he knew that the most important unacknowledged guest at that banquet, human beings. And Darwin knew even more that we were probably, our origins were probably in Africa, that we are risen apes, not fallen angels. And I think in 1871, he actually predicted that, our ancestors, came from Africa, which at the time, as you can imagine, was heresy. All of the audience here certainly knows, of our close relation with primates and apes. And we are, in effect, another ape. Next time you go, this just shows, you want to think of Africa as the birthplace of the human species. This is the Great Rift Valley from Somalia to Mozambique. You want to think of that as the birth canal of the human species. We're all Africans. Africa is, in our blood, our original bones are in Africa. Now, next time you go to your physician and they take a history and they say, I need to go over your family history, give them this. This is your family history. And I want to demonstrate something else because, again, these are, I think, basic understandings that I think you want to know and I think should be seen as a standard to be an educated person in the 21st century. So, imagine my arms are about 4 billion years of life. And life begins over here, a replicating molecule. And Matt Ridley makes the argument that all of us on chromosome 1, at an area near the center of chromosome 1, we all carry the descendant of that original replicating molecule. I still find that just astounding. So, life is bacteria, single-cell organisms. This is the present over here. This is the beginning. So, life is single-cell organisms to about here, 1 billion years ago. Cells get together, think flatworms, central nervous systems. Why is this important? Serotonin, the oldest monoamine neurotransmitter present in all animals. As you'll see, crucial to the neurobiology of ritual. Slightly afterwards, dopamine, norepinephrine. Again, crucial neurotransmitters to religion. Dinosaurs show up here, and then dinosaurs go extinct about the last phalange on my finger, and then this starts. 65 million years ago, our primate ancestors. Our eyes move from the side of our heads to the front. We need somebody to cover our back. Social living begins, social group living begins, and it's these social mechanisms, as you'll see, are crucial to religion. Now, look over here, just this little twig. This is our common ancestor with chimps and bonobos, and then about 5 million years ago. This little twig right here is the hominid line, and this is your immediate family history. The hominid line and Australopithecines, and then this is our most immediate family, Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, already probably complicated social living, group living. We're the last surviving hominid. And this represents about 2 million years of evolution. Homo erectus leaves Africa maybe 1.5 million years ago. The orange line, I think, makes it to China, the Caucasus. Homo heidelbergensis evolves in Africa. One group goes to Europe, becomes the Neanderthals. Other Homo heidelbergensis stays in Africa, becomes us. We show up about 200,000 years ago, and this is the spread of our species. And what is extraordinary is the genetics tell us that there was a bottleneck, severe climate change. We got down to as few as 600 to 2,000 individuals. That's maybe 70,000 years ago. And we survived, bounced back, spread around the world. Now, I want to take a little detour because I think this is fascinating. The common understanding has been that we went through, to get to North and South America, we went across the Bering Strait and into North America and down to South America. And there's new evidence that we may have come, or at least a part of the population may have come to the East Coast 26,000 years ago from the Soltrian population in France and Spain. And I'm basically an educated redneck from Virginia. I love this stuff because 45 minutes from the very Christian capital of the Confederacy is one of the sites, Cactus Hill. So 20,000 years before Christ, people like us may have been living on the East Coast of the United States. I find it extraordinary. And there's, really increasingly good evidence. It's utterly fascinating. So the bottom line is that all 7 billion people in the world today, all 7 billion of us, are brothers and sisters. We're all Africans. Put aside your racial differences, your ethnic differences, religious differences. We are all the sons and daughters of between 600 and 2,000 individuals that arose in Africa, about 70,000 years ago. Extraordinary. Now, in evolutionary time, we had pretty rapid brain growth, and this is one slide of it. Can you all see over here? Do I need to? Okay. And look particularly in the frontal areas of the brain. This is a Homo erectus versus Homo sapiens, and notice particularly the frontal areas. Now, think about it. We left Africa without language, in small groups, and made it as far as Indonesia and China. Right? So we'd conquered the physical environment maybe 1.5 million years ago. So what would have been the most challenging, complex aspect of the environment that would have driven that brain evolution, particularly that brain evolution in frontal lobes? Anybody want to guess? Okay, it was each other. Okay, we were the most complex, difficult, challenging part of the environment that drove the evolution of our big brains. And this is what makes us an incredibly social species, an ultra-social species. You want to think of the brain as a social brain, and it's those mechanisms that I'll show you go into religion. And so religious ideas they're really extraordinary uses of everyday, ordinary cognitions, particularly social cognitions. And religion is a byproduct of mechanisms that originally evolved for other purposes. Now you think, well, byproduct, that sounds kind of weak. Don't be confused. Reading and writing is a cultural byproduct of mechanisms designed for other purposes. Vision, fine motor skills, innate language. I don't think anybody here would say reading and writing is a weak byproduct. It's a powerful cultural invention, but it's not an adaptation per se. It's a byproduct of other adaptations, and that's the way you want to think about religion. Now, how many of you here at times crave a Big Mac meal? Sure. Now, come on. Okay, how many of you crave a juicy steak at times? Okay. How many of you, if there's a brownie downstairs and it's 3 a.m. and you wake up and you know it's downstairs, how many of you, come on. Sure. Okay. What I want to show you is that if you understand the psychology of junk food, you understand the psychology of religion. It is the same phenomena. All right, now why do we crave Big Mac meals? Because we lived and evolved in harsh, dangerous environments. Starvation was always right around the corner. And we developed cravings for things that were rare and crucial. How many of you crave broccoli? None of us, because tubers were readily available. We crave fat, but it was the fat of lean game meat. We crave sugars, sweets, because it was the sweet of ripe fruit. But junk food comes from those adaptations, but then comes back at us with a supernormal stimulus. Instead of lean game meat, we get the fat hamburger. Instead of ripe fruit, we get Coca-Cola, brownies, that give us a supernormal stimulus of dopamine in particular. So you see that junk food arises from adaptations, is a cultural creation from those adaptations that comes back at us in a supernormal stimulus. Think of religion. Now, anybody been around a 2-year-old? What does a 2-year-old do when a 2-year-old gets distressed? It comes over to you and beseeches to be picked up. That's the attachment mechanism. All right? Pentecostal worshipers, that's your attachment mechanism. Okay? And what does religion give us? It gives us a supernormal parent, a supernormal caregiver attachment figure. But it's based on that fundamental mammalian attachment system. So, I promised you, if you understand the psychology of junk food, you understand religion. Now, what I want to do is I'm just going to go through some of the cognitive mechanisms. And these are the ones that I think are some of the most important ones. An easy mnemonic for it is damn it, okay? Decoupled cognition, agency, attachment, minimally counterintuitive worlds, moral inferential systems, intentionality, theory of mind. I'm going to give you some of those so you start to see. This is some of the additional ones that I won't go into, and then we'll talk about ritual. But basically we have an understanding. In a sense, we have the anatomy of religion, the neuroanatomy, the cognitive anatomy of religion now. And start with decoupled cognition. Now, all of you here, since I have begun my talk, I will guarantee have thought about a conversation you need to have with somebody later today or tomorrow. You can decouple your cognition in time and space. You can think about a conversation you may have had last night. Okay, so you can move in time and space and have a complex social interaction with someone who is not present. We take it for granted. It's actually kind of extraordinary cognitive software, but you can see how religion allows for or pirates on this mechanism. It allows you to have a complex interaction with an unseen other. And right now, I could ask all of us here to imagine a complex interaction with President Obama and ask President Obama for something and offer to give him something in return. And you can see that that's a decoupled cognition. He's not present. It's an authority figure. We're asking for reciprocity. So what I'm hoping to show you is I'm going to sort of tease out the individual mechanisms, but you see how they all come together in a seamless whole based on these mechanisms. An authority figure, reciprocity, those kind of things. Now, we also, and as you can see, this is, I'm getting to the age when a lot of those near and dear to me have died. I still carry on conversations with them in my head. So you can see it's just one little step to ancestor worship. Now we also decouple our cognition in our neuroanatomy. And I'm going to demonstrate it this way. Hold on. Okay, imagine that this is your brain, and this is the frontal lobe right here. So we're going to look at your right half of your brain. And this is the medial frontal cortex. And this is the area of your brain where you perceive non-physical attributes, your own wishes, feelings, desires, your perceptions of other people's wishes, feelings, desires. Medial prefrontal cortex. Then physical attributes, your own body and the body of others. You're looking at my body, you're processing that information on lateral cortex. So that in a sense, the mind-body split is built into your very neuroanatomy. So, think about it. If I had to have a body in front of me to interact with the person, it would be a real handicap. But this split allows me to interact with an unseen other. And so you can see that the basis of the idea of souls is just one small step from the default design of our brains. Now I want to turn to the attachment system. And this is probably evolutionary theory's most important contribution to human well-being. John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth mapped it out in humans. But this is your basic mammalian caretaking system. And in our species, part of the attachment mechanism was not just to our parents, but to other crucial adults, alloparents. And it's what helped us develop theory of mind, which we'll talk about in a minute. But again, all these mechanisms come together. But your basic attachment mechanism to caregivers. And there's a haunting story in Alan Walker's book about the Nakatomi boy, the 1.8 million-year-old Homo erectus boy that they found, the skeleton. And they also found the skeleton of a woman who had died 1.8 million years ago, and they noticed that she had vitamin A poisoning, which is a terrible way to die. You get hemorrhaging into your joints. It's miserable. And they noticed that there was calcification. They suddenly realized that this woman had survived for months on the savannas, immobilized. People had been taking care of her. To me, it's just a haunting story and a beautiful illustration of that early social attachment mechanism and caretaking in our ancestors. And the attachment mechanism is not only crucial for religion, but it's also crucial in the struggles to give up religion. And this is no better illustrated than in Darwin's life, Darwin himself. And if you remember, the Voyage of the Beagle is 1832 to 1836, and Darwin went on the voyage as a creationist, and he comes home, and in 1837, spring of 1837, he gives his birds to John Gould, the ornithologist. Gould comes back and says, these are species never before seen in nature. And it hits Darwin. There's not special creation. There's evolution over time. There's change of species, and that these birds were like the ones that came from South America, but they had evolved into different species on different islands. He saw that there was evolution through time. And this is in the spring of 1837. And he started his notebook. This is his original notebook and his tree of life. But he didn't have a mechanism. Then in the fall of 1838, September of 1838, now, keep in mind that, Darwin is 29 years old, right? And he's seen it. And this is from his notebook. And then he reads Malthus's essay. Now, he could see that we were animals and that we had evolved over time. And he reads Malthus's essay about population, and he suddenly sees he has his mechanism, that far more are born than survive. Those that survive and have ability for reproductive success are the ones that lead to new species and new adaptations. So he has it figured out in the fall of 1838. He is 29 years old. And at that time, he decides to marry his first cousin, Emma Wedgwood, who is very religious. And somewhere in the fall of 1838, he tells Emma about his idea, about his discovery. And one of her letters back to him survives. And she is distressed. She sees the implications of this in 1838. In January of 1839, they're married, and another letter of hers survives. And she is still upset. And Darwin carried that letter with him, and when he wrote his autobiography in 1881, he pulled it out and he wrote the line on the bottom, "You don't know how often I have cried over this." And so one of the reasons that he sat on his idea for 20 years was that he knew the distress that it caused his wife, who was his principal attachment figure. His mother had died, and Emma was crucial to him. By the 1840s, on Sunday mornings, they would walk to church, and Emma and the children would go into church, and Darwin would just keep on walking. It was a painful source of distress for him and between the two of them. And the attachment mechanism is one of the things that makes it hard. The attachment to primary caregivers is one of the things that makes it difficult to give up religion. In this audience, I will wager you there are people here, how many of you had, when you decided to become a non-theist, it caused distress with your families? Okay, look at those hands. That's what we're talking about. And this is one of the best statements of it. Carl Giberson, one of the people who tries to, he's a physicist at Nazarene College, and he tries to unite evolution and Christianity. And I think this is the clearest statement of the difficulty of giving up belief. He would lose his family. Now, when you look at this is inferential reasoning. And basically what it means is you fill in the blanks. There are no lines, but you see a square, even though there's no line there. You just assume it. Inferential reasoning. And this is crucial to one of the main pieces that go into religious belief, minimally counterintuitive worlds. And if I tell you that this tree will fix your computer, will do your taxes, will do your laundry, will schedule your doctor's appointments, you're simply answering the wish of a young girl. Maybe not this audience, but you're going to be a little bit vulnerable to believing that because it's a minimally counterintuitive idea. And minimally counterintuitive ideas use our bias towards novelty. We have to be biased towards novelty because novelty could kill us. So we're oriented towards picking up novelty, trying to understand it, and this utilizes that. And this is why we all remember Little Red Riding Hood. It is perfect, that there is just two little twists, the wolf talks and Little Red Riding Hood and her grandmother survived death. But those are the only twists. Everything else about wolves and grandmothers and little girls is right there. What's the most watched movie of all time? It is The Wizard of Oz. And why? Because it is full of just minimally counterintuitive ideas. They're not massive violations of humanness. It's right there. The Wicked Witch of the West, she can fly on a broomstick, but everything else about mean older women is right there. Okay? And what is the story about? Why do we remember the story? Because it's a deeply human story. It's a human story about development. It's about what all of us went through, which is growing up and being worried that we weren't courageous enough, that we weren't smart enough, that we weren't kind enough. And what's one of the major things about growing up is we discover that our parents are ordinary humans. They're not the super parent of childhood. And so The Wizard of Oz is a deeply human story. It's all there. You don't pick up on it. But there are actually very few violations. And this is the crucial aspect of all religions. Minimally counterintuitive ideas. The Judeo-Christian God. There's just some violations of physics. He's everywhere. But everything you know about older, surly guys is in place and just assumed. You don't even think about it. But it's like, God can understand my southern accent in English. Think about it. If God knows what I'm thinking, why would I have to pray to him? Why would I have to have ordinary human conversation? So if you look at any religious ideas, any religious belief, any religious idea, it's based on these, and fairy tales, they're based on these minimally counterintuitive ideas, which are novel, not too many violations, deeply human, and grab our attention. Now, moral inferential systems. The religious will tell you that you can't be moral without religion. And part of what makes us vulnerable to that is that our moral inferential systems are automatic, unconscious, and we can't be fully conscious of them, even begin to be conscious of them. And so we're a little bit on the defensive. And religion pirates that and says, well, you need the rules of religion to be moral. Let me encourage you. Paul Bloom, The Moral Life of Babies, New York Times Magazine. Google it, fabulous article. That group at Yale has done some brilliant research showing that moral inferential systems come online in 3- and 6-month-old infants. Just wonderful research. These infants can make social judgments about good agents and bad agents and punishing bad agents. Just fabulous stuff. But it shows that our moral systems are automatic, deep, unconscious, and we just can't gain conscious access to them. And they're basically emotional, and they track on these domains. When there are violations in these domains, we have moral responses. The other article to look at is Steve Pinker, The Moral Instinct, again, New York Times Magazine. Those two articles, I think I would read Pinker first and then Paul Bloom. And you will be educated about that's another revolution, the revolution in the cognitive neurosciences of morality. Fabulous articles. Now, intentionality, and it's with an S. And can you all read the caption on the cartoon? Okay. Now, we just take this for granted because, again, it's this automatic mechanism, and it sort of goes like this. First order would be, I hope. Second order is, I hope Tom likes this talk. Third order, Tom knows. I hope he likes this talk. Fourth order would be, Julie knows that Tom knows that I hope he likes this talk. It's kind of, when you parse it apart, it's kind of awkward, but we just take this stuff for granted. It's part of our social mechanisms. We just do it automatically. And we don't even think about it because it's so automatic. But as you can see, religions, again, utilize this. So I believe, first order, I believe that God wants us to act with righteous intent. And so you can see again how religion, again, is just one step away from these ordinary cognitive mechanisms that are crucial to social life. And what I would submit to you is that the best statement I've heard about the difference between true morality and religious morality is this. True morality is doing what is right, regardless of what you're told. Religious morality is doing what you're told, regardless of whether it's right. Now, theory of mind. And again, this is one of the things that's crucial to religion. And you come into the world already with these mechanisms ready to develop, and you can't see my mind, you can't see my brain, so you have to develop mechanisms to try to build theories about what's going on in my mind, theories about what I'm thinking, feeling, desiring, and how do you do that? And these are very fragile, and they overread, and you do it through a lot of different things. Let me just show you a couple of them. Now, if you look at the picture of Bogart on the right, on your left. Right. Time to go see a neurologist. Okay, on your left, look at the picture of Bogart on your left. All right. Now, which way is he looking? He's looking to his left, right? Everybody see that? Bogart is looking to his left. Now, look at the other picture. Bogart's looking now to his right. Everybody see that? Go back and forth between the pictures. Okay, it's the same picture, it's just a negative. And what I'm trying to show you is to tease out, you've got separate mechanisms, when you look at faces, completely separate mechanisms that are following eye gaze as a way of reading intention. Now, look at this picture and make a guess. What is this person feeling? Anybody want to guess?
Uneasy.
Uneasy. Okay, right. What about this person? Playful. Step back and think about it, folks. You looked at grainy black and white photos of eyes, and you made very discerning judgment about emotional states. The movie actor Sacha Baron Cohen, everybody familiar with him, Borat? This is his first cousin, Simon Baron Cohen, who figured out Asperger's and autism, and we read about 212 different emotions just on eye gaze. All right, now think about our ancestors, the Homo erectus, who made it out of Africa in small groups, no language. Okay, they're evolving the ability to know what's going on in other people's minds. We have these very complex theory of mind mechanisms. Jesse Bering, if you've not seen his book, The Belief Instinct, read it, follow his work, writes beautifully, and has done some brilliant research. And theory of mind mechanisms don't turn off. This is the problem with grief. We have natural kind mechanisms that tell us this body is dead, but our theory of mind mechanisms are still going on. If any of you have lost somebody close to you, you just keep talking to them. Even though you know they're dead, there's another part of your mind that is still talking to them. And it's because these theory of mind mechanisms stay turned on. Baring's done this is just one of his pieces of research. It's a puppet show with children, and he tells the children it's just a puppet show, and an alligator eats a mouse. And then he asks the children, is the mouse still thirsty? Nope. Mouse still eat grass? Nope. Does the mouse miss its mother? Oh yeah. Is the mouse still angry with its brother? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they had, and you can see, you see these mechanisms in children much clearer. And we're born with these mechanisms, and they come online early, and some of the recent research has teased these out, which is just brilliant, I think. And his point is that we just simply can't imagine these mental states not being present, and that's part of why we keep talking to our dead ancestors, and we can talk to gods. Now, that's just a taste I hope you've gotten for some of the mechanisms. Now, I want to show you just a little bit of the evidence for this, because these theories are now increasingly backed up by good evidence, good empirical evidence. This is a study that came out of NIH, National Institutes of Health, during the Bush administration. I just love it. And basically, up until this study, we only had brain scans of people that are on the edges, monks, nuns. This was a scanning study of people that were just ordinary citizens, some religious, some not. And basically what they showed, Capogianis and his group showed, was that religious belief, there are no specific religious circuits in the brain. They utilize these theory of mind circuits that I've been telling you about. And so again, religion just arises from these mechanisms, and this is, one of the most important studies that backs up the byproduct theory of religion. A lot of you are familiar with Sam Harris's work. Sam Harris is a neuroscientist. He's got 2 neuroimaging studies that are worth looking at, and he did one specific one comparing non-theists and Christian believers. And the bottom line for his study that's important is that our religious beliefs are in the area of our brain that deal with identity, who we are. This is why you cannot argue somebody out of their faith, and they just dig in their heels and that's why people have to come to it quietly on their own, because they're shifting basic identity in addition to possibly giving up attachment figures, but you're having to shift a basic identity. This is a study done actually at University of Chicago Business School by Epley and a group also in Australia. And I just love this study. And they basically look at, say, my attitudes towards gay marriage, abortion, all sorts of things, and they scan my brain. They ask what I think Bill Gates' attitude, Barry Bonds' attitude is on these issues. Then they also ask me, if I'm a believer, what I think God's attitudes are on these issues. And this surprised me. I would have assumed that God would be perceived as another, like Barry Bonds and Bill Gates, another. And it turns out not to be true, that God's attitudes map onto your attitudes. And this is neuroimaging evidence that basically God's attitudes are just a projection of our own. And what's even more brilliant about the study is they manipulated my beliefs. They would manipulate my beliefs, scan me again, and then also, and guess what? My attitudes had changed, but surprise, surprise, God's attitude has changed too on the same thing. And one of the things that's important about this is that we tend to think that religions influence people, but people may be drawn towards religions, particular sects, because it actually reflects their beliefs. It may not be the one-way street we've assumed, that religions impose things, that people may move towards particular sects because it reflects their beliefs. For those of you that are soccer fans will appreciate this one. This is the Argentine national team, is the shirt and the Argentine fans. So you may conform your religion to your beliefs. Another thing that's crucial is what's called hard-to-fake, costly signals of commitment. And all of us are familiar with this in religion and think it's bizarre. It is, and it's terrible, but it's close to something all of us do. If I tell a woman that I'm deeply in love with her and want to marry her, why should she believe me? Okay? Because I have to come up with a hard-to-fake, costly signal of commitment, a diamond ring. Okay? That's a hard-to-fake, costly signal of commitment. And we do that all the time, because once language evolved, it allowed us to lie, so we have to have signals that we're not lying, that we're hard-to-fake, honest, costly signals of commitment. Religions use this. All right, so I've given you a taste, I hope, for some of the cognitive mechanisms. You can basically take religious ideas and tease them apart to these basic cognitive mechanisms that originally evolved for other purposes. And then they come together in the religious ideology that we're all vulnerable to. They arise from these cognitive adaptations. Religious ideologies, pirate them and present them back to us in supernormal stimuli. Now, we're going to look at ritual, and one of the most interesting things is that there are three populations still on the earth today that are close to the original population that came out of Africa. The Thomson in Africa, the Andaman Islanders, who were isolated to the beginning of the 20th century, and the Aborigines, who the evidence suggests came in one wave to Australia about 60,000 years ago. And these populations, the Thomson of Africa, the Andaman Islanders, and the Aborigines, all are the closest to the original population. And guess what? Their religions are identical. They're based on song, dance, and trance. They're almost identical religions. And so Nicholas Wade, look at his book, The Faith Instinct. He makes a very good argument that this is a window into deep time, into deep history. And it's a look at the original religion of our Homo sapien ancestors in Africa. And it is based primarily on song, dance, and trance, on physical movement. Song and dance were indistinguishable. Now, what I'm going to do is what we just did with the cognitive mechanisms. We're going to take those apart and look at their elements and then put them back together again. And again, this is, Thomson, Aborigines, and notice touch, movement, synchronous movement, rhythm, music, and what was crucial about these religions is that it immediately is a social leveler. It brings communities together. The usual hierarchies are diluted. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of neurochemistry here, which is important. Serotonin, oldest monoamine neurotransmitter. This is what we boost with things like Prozac. Serotonin enhances your self-esteem. Serotonin, when you get boosts of it, has you focus outwards instead of, internalizing and ruminating. It has you focus outward. It has you feel better. And you all are sitting there quietly. Your serotonin neurons in your brainstem are going about 3 cycles a second. I'm up here moving around. Mine are going about 5 cycles a second. You go out and exercise, particularly aerobic exercise, you get a real surge in serotonin levels. Dopamine, also monoamine neurotransmitter. Dopamine and norepinephrine. Again, with exercise, you boost those. Dopamine, memory, attention, focus, marking salience. The things that you remember from my lecture are the things that got marked by dopamine, memory. Oxytocin, everybody's heard about oxytocin. When women give birth, massive outpouring of oxytocin. But every time you have an orgasm, little hit of oxytocin. Bonding and trust. Oxytocin, the trust hormone. Endorphins, everybody's heard of endorphins, the runner's high. But endorphins prepare our bodies for potential injury, but also endorphins are another trust hormone. Endorphins get stimulated, again, it's a feeling of trust and connection with other people. So we're going to look at touch here for a minute. Now, when you touch somebody that you know, they get release of oxytocin and endorphins. I'm not going to have him do it, but if Tom now knows me a little bit, if I put my hand on his shoulder and we're working on a project, his frontal lobe relaxes and he can work more easily. He can attend to it. Very crucial. Oxytocin and endorphins released with touch. And everybody's familiar with this image, there's an incredible study that the NBA basketball teams that touch the most are the most successful. And the biggest toucher in the study that was done was Kevin Garnett of the Boston Celtics. Within half a second of shooting a foul shot, he had reached out and touched every one of his teammates. The players that do the best touch the most. Now, if Julie here, if we take her and we put her in an imaging machine and show her a frightening scenario, her amygdala, the fear mechanism, lights up. If she's holding my hand, and I'm a relative stranger, we show her a fear scenario, her amygdala lights up, but not as much. If she's holding her partner Tom's hand, show her a fear scenario, her amygdala doesn't light up much at all. And the degree to which it does not light up is proportional to her rating of the quality of the relationship between the two of them. Amazing research. So touch is much more powerful than we have realized. Synchronous movement. If I take this audience and divide them into two groups randomly, and I ask one group just to walk around the building, I ask the other group to walk around the building in lockstep, and then give each group the same economic trust game, the group that just walked around the building in lockstep will be trusting each other more. Brilliant piece of research by Robin Dunbar's group in England. They took rowers, and because now you've got rowing machines that give you work output, they could put the rowing machines together and they could measure their work output. They could control for work output, whether they rowed as a group or singly. And pain thresholds, when they rowed as a group, went way up. They didn't feel as much pain as soon. Same amount of work output. The only thing they were doing was working in synchrony. So their endorphin levels went up, and they weren't touching. Just synchronous movement alone boosts endorphins, probably maybe also oxytocin, but they trust more. The picture didn't come through. I have a monkey singing here. I'm sorry. All right, we're going to look at music here for a moment. So the earliest religions were based on song, dance, and trance. Song and dance, vigorous muscle activity for 8 to 12 hours at a time. Extraordinary. And boosting all these neurotransmitters that I talked about. And again, song and dance, music and movement was indistinguishable. They weren't separate as they are in our culture. What's music? There's an argument whether music is actually a sexually selected adaptation. This is what Darwin believed. Jeffrey Miller is the most recent advocate of this. Others like Steve Pinker and Gary Marcus think it's a byproduct of language and rhythm. Whether it's a byproduct or an actual adaptation, all of us know that music is very powerful emotionally, and it too touches these neurotransmitters. Now, what I'm going to do here for a moment, so again, we know that music stimulates endorphins because we can block the pleasure of music by giving an opioid blocker. We can give naloxone and block your pleasure from music, which shows that your pleasure from music is coming from those endorphins. And so music too boosts endorphins, trust. Now, anybody here have a birthday today? Anybody have a birthday this week? Okay. I want to volunteer up here to help me. And I'm going to ask you to put your arms around each other, standing, and then we're going to start swaying, synchronous movement, and then we're going to sing 2 verses of Happy Birthday. All right? All right? Now, first of all, okay, get that pain threshold now, okay? Get that pain threshold. Now, can somebody come up and join me so I'm not left abandoned up here alone? Oh, good. All right. All right, now, let's everybody stand, get next to somebody.
This is too fun.
All right. All right. All right. Everybody link to somebody? All right. Now, we're going to start swaying for a minute. We got the touch. Let's get the synchronous movement going. Okay, we're going to do 2 verses of Happy Birthday, one to Amy and one to Brad. Are you ready? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Amy. Happy birthday to you. Now let's belt it out. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Brad. Happy birthday to you. And many more. Many more. Give yourself a round of applause. Come on, thank you. All right. All right. Now sit down, try to overcome your embarrassment. Well, some of us. All right, now. Find your pain threshold. How many notice the difference? Okay, that's not a controlled experiment, so we got some biases here. But, clamp down. How many of you notice the difference in the pain threshold? All right. Imagine doing the equivalent of that for 8 to 12 hours through the dark nights on the savannas or in the outback or on the Andaman Islands. Imagine doing that, okay? And the boost, the surges of these neurotransmitters you get. Okay, and this is the basis of the earliest religions, this powerful bringing together of members of an ultra-social species to create intense community bonding. And sometimes with audiences, I'll ask them to think about somebody beforehand that they're in conflict with, and then afterwards have them think of that person. That's a little tougher, but you sometimes you notice a shift. It's harder to dislike somebody if you've got this surge of trust hormones. All right. And the earliest artwork we have about our species is groups in religious songs and dance. There are no early paintings of just a person or 2 people talking to each other. So rituals were crucial. They solved all sorts of group problems. They solved the problem of demonstrating commitment, courtship. This is the first square dance. This is where you're checking out potential mates. It helped men commit to difficult tasks like war. It settled disputes. And this was part of, and what religion still serves is it brings community together, it builds and binds communities. To some extent, the ideology is secondary. This is what it does. And if you look at all of today's modern religions, you will still see echoes of this original religion of our species. Next time you see men, Islamic men doing this, think of it as the echoes of an ancient dance that was first done on the savannas of Africa. What are they doing? They're moving in synchrony. All right? They're touching each other. They've banned music, but they don't need it. They've got the chanting of the imam. Okay? Buddhists have, most people think of Buddhists as the Buddhist monks. Look at some place like Bhutan, which is, unconstrained Tibetan Buddhism. These musical festivals with dancing and swirling and color. Think of the Orthodox Jewish men moving in synchrony before the Wailing Wall. All right, chanting. It's a kind of music, synchronous movement. They're close, they're touching. Look at any of our modern religions, and this is what you see, is echoes of this original song and dance. Now, anybody know why pews are in churches, why pews were put in churches in the 16th century? Anybody got a guess? Stop the dancing, right. Okay, and so the dancing moved outside. And when societies got big, political power, had to suppress some of what was going on in churches and the leveling of social hierarchies. So they put the pews in to stop the dancing, and the dancing went outside. Mardi Gras, Carnival. But look at all modern religions, and this is what you see. So when you look at them, this is what I want you to think about. Can all of you see the slide here? I wish you would make up your mind, Mr. Dickens, is it the best of times, is it the worst of times? What I want to close is with this, that it is both. It is the worst of times, and it is the best of times. It is the worst of times in that all we got to do is pick up a newspaper and you see the degree to which religion poisons our politics, falsifies our ethics, stops the unlimited promise of stem cell research. All of this audience knows the evils of religion. But what I hope I have shown you is that it is the best of times. We are the first generation, the first generations, I should say, because there's several represented here. We're the first generations in the history of the world to understand religious belief. We now know how human minds generate religious beliefs, why they generate religious beliefs, why they generate the specific religious beliefs that they do. And the challenge before us is, what am I going to do with this knowledge? What are you going to do with this knowledge? What are those charged with the education of the future generations going to do with this knowledge? That is the challenge before all of us. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions.
Is that working?
I believe so.
So I think that I think you did this talk, and Tom Flynn was once in the audience, and he wrote a response. I'm not sure whether you've seen his response, but
I think I have, and I'm sorry I can't remember it.
But he's very down on the idea of ritual, whereas in my work at Harvard, one of the things I'm very interested in as an academic and also as a community organizer is intelligently including music, dance, ritual in humanist communities to increase bonding and a common commitment to a set of values. Would you speak to your thoughts about that? Do you think that secular communities based around secular values might incorporate ritual music in order to generate greater support for those values?
I think we have to.
Okay.
I think there's no question. We've got to find our meaningful rituals that bring people together. And even if it's just, if you look indirectly, some of that is happening in that we have meetups where we just go, talk and drink, and if you look closely, a lot of people are, sitting, touching, and talking with each other. But yeah, the more we do that, the better.
But then, I'm sorry to ask a second question.
No, please. I love questions.
I'm intrigued by the response, because when I talk about these ideas and give examples of the sort of things one might do in a community, I have a lot of positive responses. I also have a lot of very negative responses where people say, I don't want to do that, at the same time themselves having come to the conference and listened to the music of the atheist musicians and things like that, are engaging in the activities that they say that they detest. So I find that a very interesting form of dissonance there, and I wonder what you think about it.
Well, I think we have to ask those people who object to it why. And I have unfortunately, I can give you one example of this. I gave this talk in Buffalo at CFI, or a version of it, and
that's where he would have seen it.
And I used to have people stand and sway and sing 4 verses of Amazing Grace. And the reason I did that was to show people that they would get the boost of neurotransmitters even though they were singing a song, the content of which they strongly disagreed with. And several people didn't like it, and there was one woman in particular that made a very good point, is that for her, she didn't get a boost in any neurotransmitters. It just made her furious because she had, her memory of that kind of thing was traumatizing. It was associated with the degree to which she had been badly scarred by growing up in a religion. So I think maybe some of the people, when they leave religion, they want to get away from that kind of thing. So I think that has to be respected. I think it's difficult, but so I think that's, again, people who object to it, I think you want to try to understand why, and you want to respect their feelings. But I think overall, I think we need to have more things like, how many of you went to the Reason Rally? Okay, we're standing in the rain, touching each other. It was fabulous, okay? And that was part of it. You're there with strangers, you're bouncing up against it. And those are, I think, a very powerful ritual. and it had some of these elements. You know, it went on for a long time. You're in the rain, and there's music and laughter. Laughter does the same thing. So yes, more.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Your questions always sound more intelligent simply because of the accent. So
It intimidates the hell out of me.
Actually, 2007 was the first atheist book I ever read was Breaking the Spell by Daniel Dennett. And it was what really my catalyst to come out and say I'm an atheist. So I'm curious, because I've had atheists and Christians read that book, and I'm curious with this speech, obviously you've had Christians see it. How much do you feel they compartmentalize what you tell them versus have you had Christians come up and say, wow, this really shook me, and now I understand why I believe the way I believe, that it's not really my fault, I'm wired this way. Just your response to maybe Christians that have seen this speech.
I had the great good fortune of giving a version of this talk at American Atheists in 2009. And it was very well filmed, and it was put on the web, and still has legs of about, I think it's now 400 and some thousand hits, and it was that response that made me write the book. And I got all sorts of response to people who saw that, and it impacted them. And I think your comment, I think everybody's a little bit different, and so we have to have a broad array of things out there. Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Hitchens, these kind of talks, these kind of books, Jesse Baring stuff. Because what you're trying to do is find the right key to that particular person's lock and their identity. And so I think we want all of it. And yes, I've been deeply gratified by the response this talk has had. It has touched people's lives, and it has helped them remove the mind-forged manacle that is religion. What got me into this, just if you're talking about books, the importance of books, was Robert Wright's The Moral Animal. That's what sent me down the path of evolutionary psychology and, all of what you've heard. Okay. Again, thank you so much for having me in Kansas. It was my first trip here. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
We do have copies of the book. Like I said, it is a fantastic book. It's a pretty thin book. It is a quick and easy read that covers a lot of these things, and it's a very handy reference to say, okay, I remember this part of the talk. And it is just fantastic to pass it around to people that really need to understand this is what your brain is doing. This is why it's happening. So thank you very much.